sorry, but how do you come off of losing the biggest rap battle in history and then you proceed to drop the worst album in your discography by far? It doesn't make sense to me, right? I have been waiting for Drake to come back from this beef and release some good music, because that's how you bounce back from losing a rap beef. You come back and prove that you're great at making music, and he's done this in the past.
I did listen to the album all the way through, for the record. I drove 501 yards away from the school. I think that there is a correlation here, because when I liked rap Drake the most, I was not only a single man, but I was an unhappy man. But those of us who feel let down by Drake the most have a reason.
He has the capability to make good music. And what I just heard, some shitty songs for you, terrible. Some of the worst singing performances I've ever heard from Drake in my life. Some of the worst writing I've ever heard from Drake in my life. Some of those lines, corny, epic levels of corny. And I'm in shock and I'm confused, because I know he knows better than this.
Also, there's usually this confidence you hear in his music. I'm not saying that Kendrick King did that. I'm just saying you can tell that he's a little off his game. More than a little.
Do you want to be humiliated? Do you like being ridiculed?
For the record, I was really hoping that this would be better. I wasn't rooting against him, maybe a little bit.
This was your opportunity to lock in and prove yourself, and you did the exact opposite. And this is going to be remembered. Like, I've lost all faith. I've lost all faith.
Now you're just some Canadian guy, man.
I just got done listening to the Drake and Party Next Door album for the first time, and my first thoughts is that album was boring as f. I don't even know where to start. First of all, vocally, the singing on this album sucks. The vocals are over-processed. Both of these guys sound half asleep throughout it. And the writing is so low effort. It is so corny. It sounds like it's written in the perspective of a teenage, heartbreaking high schooler, but these guys are in their 30s. The production, and especially the mixing, sounds cheap as hell. And don't even get me started on how god-awful that Latin song is, and also that emo indie pop song. Also, why is it 21 songs long and over an hour? Why? Yeah, this was bad. I think Drake needs to step away from music for a little bit, and Party Next Door needs to party rock the block. I don't know.
I am a massive Drake fan. No, don't get me wrong. He definitely took a serious L when it came to that beef with Kendrick. But nevertheless, I rock with Drake music heavy. So I listened to the Drake and Party Next Door collab album. I don't remember a single hook. Now, there are definitely some decent tracks, but I can't remember a single hook. That is a problem. These two artists have gave us some of the most iconic hooks in hip-hop. How do you make an entire R&B album without a single memorable hook? I'm trying not to let the beef sway my opinion. But bro, outside of a couple good songs, bro, this joint is a 2-pack of glutes. And do not let Drake make Spanish music ever again. It has become abundantly clear that Mia was a fluke, because that Spanish song he put on that album, that shit was basura.
Is Drake finally seeing the end of his reign, or have we all been too quick to judge one of hip-hop's biggest names? Until recently, it seemed like Drake's place at the top was unshakable. Every new album soared to massive first-week totals, every single dominated the airwaves, and every tour left countless fans clamoring for tickets. But the tide may be turning. With his latest release, early projections showed him moving around 250,000 album equivalent units in its first week, only 28,000 of those coming from pure sales. For most artists, that's a respectable number. For Drake, though, it's sparking heated debates. Where he once commanded blockbuster figures, he's suddenly looking at totals that reflect nearly a 50% drop from some of his previous high-water marks. What's making these numbers even more jarring is the context. Drake teamed up with Party Next Door for a 21-track album that had the full push of the industry behind it, front-page streaming placement, wide social media coverage, and enough hype to sustain any A-list release. Yet even with those factors working in his favor, the outcome has been labeled underwhelming by critics and fans who remember the days when a Drake album was virtually guaranteed to exceed 500,000 units in its first week. It's no wonder rumors began to swirl that Drake was being sabotaged by label executives who wanted to push him aside. But if you look at the promotional rollout, plenty of banner ads, and curated playlist spots, it's hard to make a convincing argument that anyone is deliberately undercutting him. So why has Drake's latest album seemingly stumbled? Some say it's fatigue, a blend of overlong track lists and a formula that, after years of repetition, just isn't resonating as it once did. Others believe the industry is witnessing a changing of the guard, with new sounds and fresh voices claiming the attention that Drake once monopolized. But before we jump to conclusions, let's break down the numbers more carefully. When we say 250,000 first-week units, that might sound massive until you see who else is on the board. For instance, Kendrick Lamar recently pulled off extremely strong showings with a more concise project, often referred to as GNX, a 12-track effort that did around 247,000 units in a week months after its release, and achieved far more streams per track than many of its competition. Kendrick's strategy of creating a tight, impactful album has clearly been paying off, while Drake's approach, packing over 20 songs into a single project, appears to be yielding diminishing returns. The contrast is glaring. If Kendrick, with fewer tracks, can muster streaming counts that match Drake's total or even surpass it, it raises the question of whether the extended album approach is losing its edge. Let's talk about that 21-track strategy. In the streaming era, longer track lists are a common way to rack up bigger numbers. Every additional song offers another chance for streams, especially on platforms that autoplay an album in full. Drake isn't alone in using this tactic. Plenty of major artists release 20-plus track projects to maximize potential streams. The problem is that fans are getting smarter, and so are critics. If you're inflating your album with filler, listeners can sense it. And in Drake's case, some longtime followers say the quality has dipped. Instead of 21 memorable bangers, they found large chunks of what felt like half-baked ideas. If the listening experience feels diluted, those streams may not hold up long-term, hence the worry that Drake's numbers might plummet in the following weeks. But that wasn't the entire story, because soon after the projections hit the internet, people began dissecting whether Drake's claims of industry sabotage had any merit. On social media, some Drake defenders suggested the label might be downplaying his release to give new talent the spotlight, yet there's scant evidence to support that. Go on any major streaming service, and Drake's new project is right there, prominently displayed. It's far more likely the album's subpar reception comes from its content than from an orchestrated blackout. Still, these sabotage rumors keep circulating, partly because Drake himself has hinted that he's fighting unseen battles. In reality, the simplest explanation might be that this particular album just isn't grabbing listeners the way his previous works did. Then there's Kendrick Lamar, who looms large in any discussion about top-tier MCs. Some fans focus on the fact that Kendrick's shorter album delivered massive impact despite having fewer tracks. It speaks to the efficiency of his craft. Fewer songs, but each one crafted to hold up on its own. With Drake, on the other hand, the repeated strategy of overshooting the track count can lead to listener burnout. And let's not forget that Kendrick's music tends to linger longer in the cultural consciousness. After all, a 12-song album that's been out for months still racked up around 247,000 units at one point, almost matching Drake's big first-week push for a new release. If Drake's output continues to lose traction at this pace, the once unthinkable might happen. He'll be overshadowed not just by Kendrick, but by a growing list of contemporary artists who are outpacing him. This leads directly into one of the most heated topics in hip-hop. Is Drake's decline symptomatic of an overall shift in the genre? New faces are emerging, and established artists are experimenting with fresh styles. That's forcing veterans to step up their game or get left behind. Drake rose to prominence at a time when emotional, melodic rap was just hitting its stride. Now that approach has become the norm, and listeners might be seeking something different, whether it's the introspective lyricism of someone like Tyler, the Creator, or the boundary-pushing production of new wave trappers. Social media has also played a role in shaping the conversation. High-profile personalities defended Drake's numbers, claiming it's still an admirable figure. Yet many fans recall these same commentators labeling other artists' similarly sized debuts as flops. The about-face has prompted accusations of double standards, further fanning the flames. Some say the sudden sympathy for Drake is nothing more than brand loyalty or personal bias, while others argue that 250,000 units, 28,000 in pure sales, is still a triumph in today's digital landscape. Whichever side you fall on, it's clear that the discourse around Drake's sales is louder than ever before. What about Drake's own fans? Surprisingly, a fair number have grown critical of his recent work. They point to a perceived lack of innovation. Where Drake was once at the forefront of blending R&B, hip-hop, and pop influences, some accuse him of coasting on that early formula. A few tracks from his new project come across as safe or repetitive, leaving fans wondering whether he's simply run out of new angles to explore. Critics argue that if Drake can't reinvent himself, he could risk losing the fervent fanbase that propelled him to superstardom in the first place. These murmurs of discontent coincide with Drake's continued push for an industry-defining deal, one that, according to reports, would outstrip even the lucrative packages that superstars like Taylor Swift command. Such demands might have worked when his albums were surefire half-million-plus openers, but if future releases hover around the 250,000 mark, he may no longer have the leverage to dictate terms on his own. Label executives are notoriously pragmatic, and if they see diminishing returns, they're less likely to grant an artist carte blanche, even one as historically profitable as Drake. So, where does this leave Drake's legacy? If he wants to stay competitive, he'll need to address the elephant in the room, the quality and originality of his music. The old blueprint, lengthy albums, emotional hooks, star-studded collaborations, no longer guarantees a smash in an environment where the audience's attention is more fragmented than ever. Some insiders believe Drake might take a step back, regroup, and resurface with a leaner, more adventurous project. If he does, it could be the spark that reignites excitement. Other observers suspect his ego won't allow such a sharp pivot, especially if he sees it as conceding that his formula is broken. We also can't ignore the human element. After a decade of near-constant output, Drake might be creatively drained. If that's the case, fans can sense the lack of genuine passion. Authenticity is prized in music, and if Drake is simply going through the motions to meet label obligations or maintain streaming dominance, the cracks will show. This extends beyond the sales figures. It's about how music lovers connect with each release. If they detect a dip in sincerity, that bond can shatter faster than any marketing campaign can fix. In another corner of the discourse, some claim that Drake's so-called downfall is just a narrative, one conjured up by critics hungry to see a giant fall. They point out that 250,000 units in a week isn't exactly small potatoes, especially in an age where streaming has fragmented the market. But that argument doesn't fully address the drop from Drake's previous heights. There's a real question about whether this is the start of a long-term decline, or merely a plateau on an otherwise meteoric career. No one stays at the top forever, and some watchers say it's only natural for him to settle into a less dominant spot. Still, the harsh reality is that other major artists like Kendrick Lamar, Eminem, Travis Scott, and Tyler the Creator regularly post numbers and achievements that rival or surpass Drake's. In a competitive landscape, resting on past success can be detrimental. A brand as big as Drake's might survive minor setbacks, but continuous dips in sales and public reception can eventually hurt even the biggest star's reputation. So, is Drake truly done? That's the million-dollar question. On one hand, it's far too soon to write off an artist who has arguably redefined the modern rap-pop crossover. On the other, the downward trend is undeniable. If he continues releasing lengthy albums that fail to meet expectations, the shine of invincibility around his name will fade, and if he keeps pointing the finger at the industry instead of looking inward, that could further erode fans' trust. Ultimately, the rap world is at a crossroads. For a long time, Drake was the default juggernaut. Now we're seeing evidence that a changing audience and new creative voices can shake up the old hierarchy. Whether Drake chooses to adapt or retreat to familiar territory could shape hip-hop for years to come. Perhaps this moment is a wake-up call, the one that pushes him to craft a genuinely transformative project, rather than relying on streaming tactics. Or maybe it's the start of a slow exit from the top tier, as new eras in music always emerge to replace the former kings. One thing is certain. The conversation around Drake's latest release isn't just about the numbers, it's about what those numbers imply for his future. If 250,000 units with 28,000 pure sales is all a 21-track Drake album can muster with full promotional support, then the days of guaranteed blockbuster dominance are gone. Whether he can pivot and reclaim that aura of inevitability remains to be seen. As fans and critics alike await his next move, the question hangs in the air. Is this a necessary fall that sets the stage for a stunning comeback, or has Drake already lived out his golden era? Given the shakeups in hip-hop, the compelling performance from artists like Kendrick, and the rumblings of discontent among Drake's own fanbase, the next year will be crucial. If Drake can deliver a sharp, focused album that resonates beyond the hype, he might rebuild that aura of an artist who can do no wrong. If not, we could be witnessing the moment a once unstoppable force becomes just another name in rap's rotating cast of stars. And that, for many, is the real shocker. Nobody ever thought it could happen to Drake, until it did. No love in hip-hop, no filter, no fluff, just the raw truth. Allegedly.